a coach rating index, which is it's developed by Matrix Analytical. It's Matrix Analytical's coach rating index. They use actual data points to determine the 10 best coaches in college football. Now, what they do is they take into account the actual talent that you have, and then your actual strength of schedule, level of competition, and the results you produced on the field. Obviously, recruiting is a big part of coaching, so that's left out of here. But this just looks at how good of a coach you are and your effectiveness at coaching, and it takes a ton of different things into account. It's probably the most effective way of determining who's the best in-game coach out there right now. And believe it or not, Josh Heupel came in at number 9. Honestly, I was a little shocked it was that low. According to 247 Sports, Brandon Marcello, 247 Sports, posted this coach rating index, which they provided to 247 Sports exclusively. And it's written that Heupel enters his 3rd season as head coach of Tennessee after winning 11 games last year and his incredible run at UCF. His high-octane offense has led to 3 10-win seasons. He's 46-16 overall. We all know about that, and then the passing efficiency and the success of that. His star rating is at 4.5, which is pretty good. 5 stars is 90 to 100. 4.5 is 80 to 89.9. So, and 4 stars is in 70 to 79.9. So he's in the 80 to 89.9 range, which in college is a B. He's just ahead of Jeff Brom at Louisville, who I do believe is a very, very, very good football coach who has maxed out what you can do at Purdue, and I think is a danger at Louisville, can be very good. Just ahead of Heupel is Hugh Freeze. Now, remember, guys, this is not a character thing. This is not an integrity thing. This is not a you might get your program in trouble and get fired thing. This isn't a recruiting thing. This is just your ability to coach on the field. And there's no doubt that Hugh Freeze is a pretty good on-field coach. I mean, he did beat Nick Saban twice. Straight about coached Nick Saban twice. What he did at Ole Miss was very, very impressive. Just ahead of Hugh Freeze, shockingly, Chris Kleiman, Kansas State, comes in at 83.88 with the score. By the way, I should point this out. Hugh Freeze at 82.01, Josh Heupel at 81.12. Okay, so Chris Kleiman at Kansas State comes in at number 7. Really has carried the program beyond Bill Snyder, and you kind of have to give him a lot of credit for that. And so he has really maximized talent. I don't know if there's another level at Kansas State. We haven't seen it yet. We never saw it with Snyder, although Tennessee did almost play Kansas State in the national title game in 98, as we remember. Ahead of all of them, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan is number 6, 85.35. This is results-based, but I do believe it's also – well, okay, so Harbaugh recruits well. But I do believe there's an overachieving factor here because he hasn't recruited at a top 5 level until this year, and he's gotten Michigan into back-to-back college football playoffs, Big Ten championships. So Harbaugh, I'm shocked, is not higher. Dabo Swinney at Clemson, 90.54. That's results-based and solely results-based. I know he's brought in a lot of talent, and there's not a lot of competition in the ACC, but you still can't argue with. Sometimes the results are so great you can't argue with them, even on an analytical basis. Now, the flaw in this, again, because it's so results-based and it doesn't take into account things that were inherited, is Ryan Day at number 4 at 93.38. I find Ryan Day to be massively overrated, as many of you know on this show. I think he's got a lot to prove. And so I don't think Ryan Day should be on this list. It's not taking into account what he's inherited and how he hasn't taken to the next level. The top 3 are not too surprising. Lincoln Riley is number 3 at 94.26. Josh Heupel is Lincoln Riley Circuit East. They run the same offense, and Lincoln Riley's doing it at USC. I think he's going to get a national championship before long. Number 2 is Kirby Smart. Number 1 is Nick Saban. Yes, they recruit a lot, but their success you really can't argue with. Shocking to me was that Brian Kelly was not on this list, and I'm waiting for Travis to say that this is my LSU homerism coming out, but Brian Kelly I think belongs on this list. I think getting Notre Dame to the playoff, I think we undersell how much you can do. We overrate how much you can do at Notre Dame. Again, this is where they take into account talent and level of competition. And Notre Dame, relative to talent, Brian Kelly did pretty much hit par. But then there's also the drawback of what you can't factor in, which is the fact that they have a much more difficult level of coursework for players at Notre Dame than other schools, which is why they always lose the week of midterms. Good morning to you, Smoky Mountain Red. Travis says after Tennessee drops Georgia at Neyland, that all changes. Rocky Top Tom, you said you've been to some Georgia games at Neyland that Tennessee dropped and should have won, and been to some that definitely not supposed to win, but they shocked him. Yeah, I think one of the most, I've seen more Tennessee shocking upsets over Georgia on the road, believe it or not. 92, Fulmer's interim game, that was a shocking upset. 2004 at Georgia, that was a shocking upset. One of the most shocking ones, not a shocking one, but in 98 when Tennessee blew Georgia out. Guys, go back and look at that game. Georgia was actually favored in that game. It was the week after Jamal Lewis went down for the season-ending injury. Travis, you said you take Heupel 100 times over Freeze and Kleiman of KSU. Okay, I'm with you on that, but I think you also have to take into account, again, this is solely just measuring results and talent. And Hugh Freeze has done a pretty impressive job on those things, despite all the other issues. Ryan Day's proven he's going to beat Youngstown State every year. Rocky Top Tom, that's pretty good. And I agree, Rocky Top Tom, Kelly belongs. Also, good point, Chip Kelly. Shocking that he's not in there. So that kind of threw me off. That's a good point. I will say, looking back on the Georgia games, Rocky Top Tom, the 24-3 comeback in 2015. Yeah, that's a good one. So, but as far as Josh Heupel being number 9, I think what's holding him back from being a little higher is the regression that happened at UCF in 2019 and 2020 after going undefeated and then 10-3 and then 6-4. This can't factor in the COVID year. It can't factor in injuries or things like that happened, and that's what's really hurting Heupel. So overall, I would say that this rating index is not the most effective way to measure the best coaches. But it's an intriguing thing to look at, and it's intriguing to think that Josh Heupel is a top 10 coach. And again, I think they got some right. I think in terms of just coaching on the field, Jeff Brom, Hugh Freeze, and Chris Kleiman are top 10 caliber on those. I mean, they really do a good job, guys, given the talent that they are dealing with. So I think it's really hard to sit there and say that this list is totally inaccurate. But here's some things you can't quantify with coaches when you just look at recruiting versus success on the field. You can't quantify what they inherited, and also level of competition, which this takes into account. You can't quantify what they inherited. That's a knock on Ryan Day. You can't quantify the exterior factors surrounding the program, whether you're at Notre Dame and your players have to have the same academic schedule as everybody else, whether you're Josh Heupel and you take over a program on probation, whether you have massive numbers of injuries. None of those things can be quantified to the level that they need to be for this to be a fully accurate list. You can't even quantify, quite honestly, and when people talk about recruiting, you can't even quantify how easy or hard it is to recruit in certain areas. I mean, that's a big part, but that's not as much of a factor here. But in general, this is why if I were doing a coach rating index, I would look at the recruiting potential of that program. I would look at the success on the field. I would look at the level of competition. I would look at injuries. I would look at what was inherited. I would look at if there's any exterior factors, probation, NCAA, things that drive people away, and things that distract the program, and academics. All of that matters as much as recruiting, scheming, and everything else. So at the end of the day, Josh Heupel, still a top 10 coach, still pretty intriguing that he's on that list. The shocking ones are Brian Kelly and Chip Kelly not being on the list. If you guys think anybody else belongs on the list, let me know. I can't really... I guess maybe you could have said that it's shocking that James Franklin's not on the list, but I don't think that's that shocking, quite honestly. And so I think this list pretty much didn't get it right, but they got most of the people right on the list. And if Josh Heupel has another year like last year, I think he's going to move up this list pretty fast because Tennessee still hasn't recruited at the level they need to be at. And so you have to give Josh Heupel credit on that front too. Now, will Josh Heupel take a step back? If he does he fall off the list? That's going to be intriguing because then, again, it can't quantify the amount of departing talent, returning talent, long-term trajectory of the program. All of these things matter when you're looking at a head coach, all of them. And you can't just take one thing. You know, we're going to start our sports history portion of this show, of our YouTube channel pretty soon, where we're going to dive into historical stories surrounding Tennessee football and actually hopefully go beyond that one day. And I'm going to break in, one of the first ones I do is I'm going to dive into what made Robert Neyland so successful at Tennessee. And it wasn't one thing. There was a confluence of things, some that had nothing to do with him, some that did, some that had to do with his knowledge of things beyond football. So we're going to take all that into account. There's so many factors that leads to a coach or a program being successful. And I think the program has as much to do with its success as a coach, depending on the time. I think in the 90s, Tennessee football as a program was behind Fulmer's success a little bit more. Not that Fulmer didn't have a lot to do with it, I'm just saying there were a lot of advantages Tennessee had.